Hi, Al. This is the podcast for the final, not the podcast, it's a video for the final piece, final work for this week. This is going to be, we're going to be moving into modernism. And I'm going to show it to you in this format right now because I have some notes on my computer that I want to be able to see. But the first artist we're going to be talking about is the artist who made this piece right here on the right. Oops. And his name is Konstantin Brancusi. And this piece that we're looking at right here is called The Kiss. And he made this in 1906. And you guys might notice right away that this is a dramatic departure from virtually any sculpture we've seen so far. Sculpture in general underwent a dramatic transformation in the 20th century, just like painting did. But I would say even at this point, it was moving forward in even bigger steps. Some of the early innovations were inspired by more rough-hewn non-Western arts. Other innovations were the constructions made by cubists like Picasso, who dabbled in three-dimensional art. Brancusi was a Romanian artist who studied with Rodin, and he rejected Rodin's rough emotionalism. Remember, Rodin made the Burghers of Calais and the Thinker, and at his heart, he was pretty classical sculptor, although his work was much more abstracted through the rough surface texture. But he decided to ditch that in favor of the Greek philosophy of Plato, which was this idea that the physical was only an imperfect imitation of the perfect idea. Brancusi wanted with his sculpture not to try to imitate nature, but to capture the idea, the essence of a subject, the essence of something, rather than the physical, the kind of copying the physical manifestation of it. He was the first sculptor to simplify his work to the point of almost uh, complete abstraction, which is, actually pretty interesting. So what you're looking at here is his piece called The Kiss. And I think the thing you can notice about The Kiss, I would like to, is that you can recognize the parts, right? You can recognize the fact that there are two lovers that are in an embrace, and that they you can see that it's one piece of rock, that he hasn't completely separated into two, so the lovers are completely connected. And that was the idea that he wanted. He wanted to get across the idea of unity. And he felt that any sort of illusion, whether it was, I want you to think back to Bernini and how Bernini was able to get the illusion of soft skin and hair and the texture of flowing gowns and feathers and clouds, and all of it was about illusion. And Brancusi rejected this idea. He thought that illusion was not what artists should be going for. They should be really trying to reach towards a truth, a deeper truth that didn't rely on illusion. And he liked the sculpture, the rougher, more what he thought authentic sculpture of non-Western cultures, African, Iberian, that he was seeing, that seemed to be more honest, more true, because it was true to the rock that they were sculpting from. And he wanted the kiss to be true to the rock. It's a rock. He wanted to make it look like a rock. He didn't want to make anybody think that it was anything other than that. But at the same time, he knew the rock was a tool, was a material that he was using to create another thought or an idea. And in this case, the kiss, he's looking for this idea of complete and utter unity. And you'll notice that he has done this in a number of ways. First off, he's taken the one piece. He hasn't divided it into two. You can tell it's one piece because of the way that the arms interconnect, and there's no separation. And even though there's a line between the bodies at the top and the bottom, you can see that it is all from a single piece of rock. And the other piece that's is really kind of lovely is how the lips are connected without seam. They're just completely connected, much in the same way that the arms are connected. And you can also see that the eyes meet, eye to eye. They meet exactly right to create one whole. So each half an eye comes together to create, one kind of abstract symbol of the whole eye. And it's also interesting to me that Brancusi he didn't really differentiate very much between male and female. He didn't worry too much about that. I'm going to show you another piece. This one is called Magic Bird. And I love this piece of Brancusi's. I think it's very interesting. And he meant for it, the Magic Bird, to be an illustration of Plato's idea of man and perfection. And I think it's kind of interesting. So you can see that it's got four elements. There is a podium, and you can see a kind of rough-hewn element, which is actually two figures, which are very unformed. You can kind of see arm shapes and leg shapes and kind of a little bit of a mashed up head shape, kind of. So a very unformed human shape here. Then we have another big block that separates this unformed shapes of human from this really elegant, very clean piece of marble, which is shaped like an abstracted bird with a very long neck and his head up in the air and his chest all puffed out. So we have this beautiful bird, and we have these unformed humans, and we have them separated by this kind of what seems to be like an impenetrable block. And they're actually made of different substances. The humans are made from limestone, and the bird is made from marble. So a rough rock and a smooth rock, polished, unpolished. Um, and and what he was trying to do was illustrate Plato's thought about the physical manifestation and the inability of physical manifestation ever to reach perfection. Remember studying that back in Greek times? How we talked about how Plato believed that no man, no human could be perfect because the material world, our bodies weren't perfect. We aged, we died, we got sick. We're not perfect, but ideas can be perfect. And so in this case, Brancusi is illustrating the bird as the idea, the free idea. Like a bird, it can fly free and it's pure. Whereas man, this is the physical form, the physical realm is represented by these two roughly sculpted men as this imperfect world, the world of human form, which can never reach that realm of perfection of idea. So if the bird represents the idea and these guys represent the physical form, you can see the separation that he puts the block between the physical form and the perfect form of idea, that the two will never be able to meet. So it was his way of expressing that. I'm going to show you one more piece of Brancusi, and I think this one is the AP one, which I can't quite remember. So this one is called The Newborn, and it might not be easy for you to see what it is at first glance. One of the things this is marble and it's pretty well polished. And one of the things you might be able to notice is that it's in the shape of an egg. And it's a pretty rounded egg, but you can see that there's some surfaces that have been carved out of the egg here and here. So it's a relative egg shape, which, an egg is a symbol for new life. And it's a symbol for birth and all that. But if you look at it, and especially if you turn your head sideways, what you might be able to see is that this shape here is the wide open, squalling mouth of an infant, of a newborn. You know how when babies are first born, how they cry, and that this is the baby's nose and brow as it's wrinkled up in that squall, that kind of crying baby. And so it's an interesting, what he's trying to do is put this essence of newborn into one very elegant shape, which is what Brancusi was all about, paring things down to their most essential form. And so for him, the idea of new life wasn't only about the potential of an egg, but also this idea of when the egg is realized in a new being. So the egg is hatched and the egg, becomes the new being, that new being has gone from the world of ideas to the world of physical manifestation, which is maybe arguably a sad thing. So kind of interesting, or at least it's a thing that might cause some turmoil. All right, we're going to pick up again with this piece here, and we're going to talk about a few of these pieces. We're going to talk about the Dada movement, which is actually a pretty interesting movement that happened early in the 1900s, so the early 20th century. So the Great War, at that point, it was the only Great War, which was later called World War I, broke out in Europe in 1914. And everybody involved, all the Europeans, thought it would be over in a few months because the dispute was rather petty. But that actually didn't turn out to be true. It turned into a long, brutal, and very deadly war with literally millions of people dying. New technology applied to war was incredibly deadly and produced things like machine guns, flamethrowers, and even airplanes were created at this time, and made that war become really quite awful. Governments took over industry and spewed propaganda to create the kind of nationalistic patriotism that would encourage blind support of the war. Kind of interesting in this time of COVID-19, actually, since there's some of that nationalistic patriotism is coming from different countries around the world now. So many people in different parts of the world grew uncomfortable with the war, and really even disgusted by the war. There was a member of Europeans at this time that felt really turned off by the government's propaganda machine that was trying to gin up support for the war by the government, and this group formed over a couple of different countries, but mostly in Great Britain, France, and Germany, and they called themselves Dada. And this movement called Dada was very political. They not only questioned the government and the war, but even art itself. They questioned life. They questioned everything. And they sought to keep alive the spirit of expressionism and add political commentary and humor. The first piece that we're looking at is by one of the founders of the Dada movement. His name was Hugo Ball. It's a photograph of Hugo Ball reciting the sound poem called Karawane. It was photographed in Zurich, Switzerland in 1960. He was a German actor, and he began the movement on the stage in a cabaret show run by himself and some of his companions. And it attracted writers and artists from all over Europe and who shared this disgust of the war, World War I. You can see that he's dressed really in a rough costume made of paper. It was all kind of painted in gold. He had his hands turned into claws, like lobster claws, which would wave up and down as he would recite poems of nonsense words. And he used nonsense words to kind of make fun or poke fun of the propaganda that the governments were spewing. Governments were saying all this stuff about how good the war was and how much it was going to get people and blah, 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 while people were being killed. And he was trying to point out the fact that what they were telling everybody were lies. And they were as true as his nonsense poems. And that even goes back to the name Dada that they named themselves. The word Dada and it means baby talk in German. It means hobby horse in French. In Russian, it means yes, yes. In Romanian, it means no, no. And so Dada means a lot of things to a lot of different people in a lot of languages. And that was the whole idea, was that they were questioning everything, questioning art, questioning language, questioning truth. So this was the first real political movement of art. And I'm going to just show you a couple of pieces. This is Raoul Hausmann, called The Spirit of Our Time. And as you can see, it's an assemblage of collected objects. So all these were objects that one could find, including like a mannequin head, rulers, and things like that. And it was all about how the government was putting propaganda inside of people's brains. And these guys used this modern art form in this way. I want to show you another piece by Hannah Hawk, which she used collage, and she also questioned ideas of what were conventions of beauty, for instance. Arguably the most famous of the Dada artists, and I'm going to scroll maybe pretty far down to find his work, was an artist named Marcel Duchamp. And I am really going to have to scroll to find his work, I fear. All right, hopefully I didn't go flying right by it. All right, I'm going to pause and find this. All right, I'm going to pick up again now that I finally found Marcel Duchamp. So Duchamp was French, and he was a member of the Dada movement. And Duchamp, and I actually haven't had you read about this, but I'm going to just mention it really quickly. I will have you read about it at a later time. But Duchamp was part of the Dada movement in this turn of the century. This piece, which is the piece on the AP called Fountain, was made kind of early on, but it's so avant-garde. It's so much in the front of the art movement that I kind of don't want to talk about it right now, because he actually really stepped out way in front of other artists at the time. So I'm going to come back to him, but I want you to know that he was part of this early movement, which was in response to World War I. But later on, he actually he ended up leaving France just after World War I and ahead of World War II, and where he became one of the main leaders of the art movement in New York City. And this was one of the reasons why in the early part of the 1900s, the center of the art world turned from Europe to the United States, was because so many artists fled Europe between the wars. But Marcel Duchamp not only was poking fun of the governments and the war, but he was also very much questioning what was art anyway. Was it about craftsmanship? Was it about making something beautiful? Was it about did it have to be something that you made with your own hands? Well, we'll pick this up. We'll pick this up at a later time, and suffice it to say, he was part of that Dada movement. I just wanted to make that connection, but we'll talk about him a little bit later. Okay, so I'm going to pick up with another art form, another movement that happened right around World War I, and actually really took seed in between the two wars. And this was in response to World War I. In Europe, there was a great deal of after the war, so many people had died, and it had wrought such destruction and such division. There was a Great Depression that fell upon Europeans after this war, and a worry that they would never really regain a healthy society again. And one of the things that many art movements did after World War I was try to find a logical, rational way to put society back together again. And one of the real primary movements that came out of this time was a movement called rationalism. And this movement was mostly centered in Holland, and one of the leaders was the Dutch artist Piet Mondrian. This is the piece that's on the AP called Composition with Red, Blue, and Yellow. And as you can see, maybe for the first time, I think, we are seeing non-representational art, which is to say that not only is it not just abstracted, but it actually doesn't represent anything in the outside world. It's not an abstraction of something. It's not an interpretation of something that's out in the real world. It is actually doesn't relate to the outside world in any sort of really direct way. Okay, so Mondrian didn't arrive immediately at this style. So let's take a peek through how he got here. This is some of Mondrian's early work. Wow, looks so different, right? And you can tell that it's a tree, but he's trying to play with it a little bit like maybe Cezanne played with nature, a little bit how Picasso and Braque were working with Cubism, and he's trying to somehow pare it down to its essential essence or shape. And here's another one that before he gets into his more mature style, where he's breaking things down even more. He's getting rid of figure and ground. So he's getting rid of, oh, here's the object and here's the background. So we call that figure and ground. And here you can see the tree is the figure and the background is the ground. But here, it's hard to tell what's the figure and what's the ground. So maybe the black lines are the figure and the whitish or the lightish colors are the ground. But when we get into the next step of his abstraction, what's the figure? What's the ground? We don't know what's meant to be the main part and what's meant to be the background. It's hard to tell anymore. And that's what he was looking at. He was looking for balance. He was looking for a very distilled style, and it took him a bit of a time to get there. So obviously he took what I'm going to go back to our AP piece. So he made the leap that Picasso and Braque could not do. They could never leap directly into non-figurative art. They always wanted to reference nature, and Mondrian eventually was able to make that leap. He went into complete abstraction, non-representation. He said, quote, "Art is higher than reality and has no direct relation to reality. To approach the spiritual in art, one will make as little use as possible of reality, because reality is opposed to the spiritual. We find ourselves in the presence of an abstract art. Art should be above reality. Otherwise, it would have no value for man." Wow, right? So he was a little bit going down the same path as Brancusi, who was trying to get to the essence of things rather than copying what was outside in the outside world. So very interesting. He called this new style neoplasticism. And what he meant by that was that it was pure art, form only, not about anything in the outside world. It was non-objective. It represents a spiritual idea rather than a figure or form outside in the world. And he thought this should blend to create a perfect balance of the universal and objective with the personal and subjective. So we've been talking a lot about that lately. We've been talking about how art went from trying to copy the objective world that's outside of us to becoming more subjective, like what's my point of view, how do I view it? And what now Mondrian is saying, maybe we need to abandon all outside reference and just try to find balance between what is subjective and what is objective, what is yin, what is yang, all that kind of thing. Okay, so I'm not going to ask you a question here because I think it's pretty straightforward. You can see that he's pared it down to the very bare essentials, right? Black, white, red, yellow, blue. What's red, yellow, blue? It's the primary colors. You artists, you all know that. So he's trying to pare it down to the very basics. And he's even pared it down to the very basic forms of art, which is line and shape. And the very simplest shape, which are cubes of some sort of square rectangle. So lines, rectangles, primary colors, black and white. That's it. The simplest form. Um, so this De Still movement believed that there were two forms of beauty: sensual, material, and the higher rational or spiritual universal forms, which is what he was trying to get at, this idea of universal form, higher form. And he was looking for balance in that universal form. But he was also looking for a dynamic sense of balance. Okay, but one could say, okay, how is this dynamic and how is it balanced? It's a tiny little dot of red versus a huge bit of I'm sorry, a tiny bit of yellow with this huge big block of red. How is that balanced? So that's my question to you. I want you to answer me this about Mondrian's piece. Does it find balance? Yes, tell me how. No, why not? What do you think? Did Mondrian find balance? Okay, and before you jump to answering this, I want you to experiment a little. With your hand, I want you to block out off certain pieces of it and ask yourself, does it need that piece in order to be balanced? Block it off, answer the question in your mind. Does it work without it? What would it happen if this piece was yellow, or that piece was blue, or this piece was red instead? Answer those questions. Did he find balance? Tell me why. If not, tell me why not. It's a kind of subjective question, but I want you to experiment with making up a different composition in your mind to see if you could do any better than Mondrian. I'd be curious to know that. All right. So in the end, you can do that on VoiceThread now. In the end, what Mondrian was doing wasn't only just playing an intellectual game about art. He was in his mind, and all of his colleagues at De Still were thinking about finding a higher order for society. They felt that society, it was emotion and pride and anger that got them into war in the first place. And if they could elevate society to this higher plane of thinking, that we would not indulge in war again, that we would leave war behind, raise ourselves above war. They wanted to reorder the world to make the natural world more pure and to make people more pure in their thoughts. Well, I guess you know the answer to the story. Did this help? Did it work? Lots of artists tried to do something like this at this time. I'm afraid none of it helped that much. But they didn't. I think their effort was move the art world forward for sure, but it also gave people another way of viewing the world, and it really helped bring a dawn of new modernism into art world. I'm going to show you a couple other pieces that grew out of this. This is called the Schroeder House in Germany, designed by the German architect Gerrit Rietveld. And you can see that he was using some of Mondrian's idea of primary color. You can see the red and the yellow and the blocks and the lines. I mean, at this point, it looks very mid 20th century, really old-fashioned to us, I think. But for them at that time, this was very modern. It was super contemporary. Here's one more. This is the red and blue chair, also designed by Schroeder, based on Mondrian's work of finding balance, this idea of the lines and the blocks and the primary colors. So this is the interior of the Schroeder house and the red and blue chair by Rietveld.